tell you what, isn't the hotel staff great? Well, we have a really unexpected, unscheduled treat for you. This coming Sunday marks the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And I think it's appropriate that as we gather here 15 years later that we reflect on that, because America in many ways is at greater risk today than it was 15 years ago. And I think we need to ponder that as we approach this election. And so I think if I asked most of you in here, you could remember where you were on 9/11. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing. Well, to help us talk about this and put this election into perspective, I've asked America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, to join us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor, I want to thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank you for, you've been here to the Values Voter Summit before, but I want to thank you for being here again. But I want to thank you for keeping the focus on national security and on America's interest in terms of protecting herself. And you know a little bit about that.
Unfortunately, I do. From being mayor for 8 years, then having the terrible attack. Remember, I became mayor virtually a year after the first attack on the World Trade Center. People think of it as 2001. Well, we were attacked in New York in 1993 by, again, Islamic radical terrorists. And I have been investigating, prosecuting, and studying Islamic radical terrorism since I was in the Ford administration in the 1970s. So for me, this is a lifetime effort, and I think I probably know as well as anyone what's at stake, because I saw what they can do and how committed they are to their evil and horrible ideas.
So when you look back 15 years, in your judgment, is the threat greater today? Has it lessened? Are we better prepared? How important is national security when we look at this election in November?
Well, it's very important. And it's probably more important than we realize, because we always, I think, Americans, as any normal, we always think of jobs and the economy as the most important issue. And of course it is, because people have to support themselves and they have to feed themselves and take care of their family. But national security is really important, largely because of the way in which this administration in Washington has deteriorated our national security. If you had asked me that question 9 years ago or 10 years ago, let's say on the 5th or 6th or 7th anniversary of September 11, I would say that our national security had somewhat improved. We were doing a better job at the airports. We were doing a better job in terms of exchanging intelligence, not only between and among our federal agencies, but with the international community. I mean, there are countries that we're not even friendly with that we have good intelligence relationships with. It's a different relationship. But since President Obama and Hillary Clinton, and I don't mean to be political, but it is a political issue, our national security has really deteriorated, and I feel our country is in more danger today than it was on September 11.
Well, we've seen that in recent terrorist attacks in California,
that's what I'm referring to,
in Florida. And I want to talk for just a moment about the role that mayors have been forced to play as a former mayor. But before I do that, I know you're from New York, but I want to ask you about your shoes.
So I wear these shoes. Someone recommended them to me for the 4 or 5 days around September 11 to remind me of what September 11 is all about, and also to remind me of the one thing that makes me, well, there are two things really that lift my spirits when I think about that day, because all the rest of that day was horrible. And one of them was the American flag being put up by the 4 firefighters who looked just like the 4 Marines at Iwo Jima. And for me, that was so, it was like after 7 or 8 hours of hearing about all my firefighters being found dead, and police officers, and 10 of my best friends, and Father Michael Judge, who was the chaplain to the fire department, who was my spiritual advisor. And I can't tell you, I was at the bedside of 22 firefighters when they were dying with Father Judge. Father Judge taught me how to deal with death. And the first person I was informed died at the World Trade Center was Father Judge. So it was a terrible group of memories that comes back. But there are two memories that come back that lift my spirits. One is the American flag. So someone that I was talking to, a wife of a firefighter, suggested I should get a pair of shoes. I always wear the flag, but I should get a pair of shoes to remind me, and socks, around September 11th, because it'll lift my spirits. I won't get depressed. So this is my Prozac.
It's effective.
And the second one were the construction workers. You know, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon that day, when the fires were burning at like 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and we were still pulling people out, you know, we were still saving people. That ended sometime that night, unfortunately and tragically. But a group of maybe 1,000 construction workers just walked down the street, and they were walking toward us. And I walked up to the guy that was the head. He was a big, giant guy, like all the construction workers are. And I said, what are you doing? What are you doing here? He said, I thought you could use us. I said, well, why? And he said, because we can lift big things. And darn it, they could lift big things. And they went right in the pile with the firefighters. And I was telling them, you can't go in without the mask on. You can't go in. And man, I couldn't stop. They would have knocked me right over. They just went right in, and they were pulling people out. And that sort of brought my spirit back. It was like...
That is the American spirit.
That is, you're darn right.
And it is on greatest display when America is at greatest risk. And we've seen it just recently in Louisiana with the flooding there.
Yes.
After every natural or even man-made desire, we see the best of Americans who pull together to help their neighbors. They don't worry about union laws. They don't worry about
right.
the government bureaucrats. They just jump in and they help.
Right.
I would say that preemptively, isn't that where we are today in America? That we need to jump in because America is in crisis.
Yeah. Tony, first of all, I hope everything is going well. And all my best wishes on what happened to you. You suffered greatly. And I know you have the strength and spirit to get through it, but still, God bless you.
Appreciate
that. Here's what I believe, and I'll try to simplify it. And this comes from 35 years of experience with radical Islamic terrorism. We are best off when we are on offense, not when we're on defense, and waiting for them to attack us. Right now, we are basically on defense, trying to figure out where they're going to attack us next. Is it going to be in Orlando? Is it going to be in San Bernardino? Is it going to be in Dallas? Is it going to be in New York, Atlanta, Chicago? Is it going to be in Paris? Is it going to be the priest whose head was cut off, which I thought got sparse coverage? Right. I mean, I know it's just one life, but there's a great significance to dragging a priest off the altar and chopping his head off.
That was a first, and you're absolutely right. We have now seen ISIS breach the sanctity of a church, and yet it got scant coverage, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about going back 1,000 years to think of things like the era of barbarism. And of course, he's not the only one whose head was chopped off, but it was sort of symbolic of how far they will go and what they will do if you give them room to maneuver. On the other hand, if you are pushing them back, and you're pushing them back into their little caves, it's a little bit harder to be planning attacks while you're defending your life than it is when you got plenty of time to sit there with your computer. And these people now, here's why I say it's more dangerous. Al-Qaeda was a certain kind of group. They were run by really great warriors, horrible people. I don't mean to say they were good people, but they're great warriors. They won the Afghan war against the Soviets. I mean, they drove the Soviets out of Afghanistan. We always thought for good reasons, but really for bad reasons. They wanted to make it a Muslim state, an Islamic state. But they weren't sophisticated in the internet, the use of social media. The group now whether it's ISIS or the 22, 23 related groups, are much more sophisticated in the use of social media, much more able to self-activate, as we've seen, people in the United States than Al-Qaeda ever could have done, largely because they have a lot of recruits from France, from Germany, from England, and from the United States.
Right.
They understand us better than Al-Qaeda did, and that's why it's more dangerous. And we don't understand them as well as we understood Al-Qaeda, because under the Obama-Clinton administration, our intelligence has dropped dramatically. I mean, when we had all those troops in in Iraq, we should have had them in Iran. When we had them in Iraq and...
We don't send troops there, just money.
Yeah. 33 billion to kill us. I mean, that gets turned around into killing us and our allies and getting ready to destroy Israel. When we had so many troops, we were getting a great deal of intelligence, because when you have a lot of troops in a country, like in Iraq, like in Afghanistan, you get a lot of intelligence. We're not getting that intelligence. Plus, rather than capturing people because Obama didn't want to fill up Guantanamo, he used drones to kill them. Well, okay, some of them you had to do that way. I always prefer capturing them, but I'm an investigator and a former prosecutor, and I want to get their information. I also can't figure out for the life of me what's more humane, waterboarding or killing somebody with a drone. At least if you're going to waterboard me, I get a choice. I can tell you the information. I can talk my way out of it. If you're going to get waterboarded, and I'm not proposing waterboarding, so don't get, let's not have it, but just you think for yourself, what's the moral difference between dropping a bomb on a man's head, who's a terrorist, or grabbing the man, sitting him down and telling him, if you don't tell me about all the other terrorists, I'm going to waterboard you. At least in the second situation, he gets a chance to save his life and do something good for society.
Well, and as you said, the intelligence value. Mayor, I want to go back, Mayor, to the issue of the municipalities. Being a mayor, now, 15 years ago, I know your background associated with law enforcement, and I know that you cleaned up New York, and you were very strong in the law enforcement arena. I spent 10 years in law enforcement, so I understand that world. 15 years ago, our law enforcement was not as advanced and equipped as it is today when it comes to dealing with terrorism. However, it's still, I'm going to ask you, I want to put this in the form of a question. Our local law enforcement has been forced to deal with an issue because our federal government has not. Is that a viable solution going forward?
With a president who can say the words radical Islamic terrorism, and therefore can point the country in the direction that we have to go, rather than the confusion that we have today, where we call the attack in Fort Hood, workplace violence. With a president who can do that, and can get the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security kind of like on the same page, what my belief has been, and I preach this all over, that the FBI and the Justice Department has to use the local police as their eyes and ears, because our new threat is coming from within our communities. You're not going to pick it up by intercepting emails, even Hillary Clinton's emails. I had to get it in. You know where you're going to get the information? You're going to get the information from the local police. So yes, a lot of them have been trained. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, very well trained. There's a whole course on precursors of terrorism that they go through. Things to look for, things to watch for. But the FBI has to use them as their eyes and ears, and that relationship has to be made closer. And for that, you need the right leadership. You need the right leadership that is explaining that we are in a war, right, and that this is an important priority. It's not just, another thing, which is the way it's treated by the president when he kind of acts very nonchalant about many of these attacks. So you've got basically 15,000 FBI agents. You've got 800,000 sworn local police officers, including big ones like NYPD, Chicago, Los Angeles. Those 800,000 should be the eyes and ears of the FBI. And I believe Donald Trump can accomplish that.
When you look at how this administration has dealt with radical Islam, in fact, even going back and rewriting policies within the Department of Justice so that even the terminology of radical Islam cannot be used, how far has that filtered down to the local level?
I'll give you a practical example of how dangerous that is. In San Bernardino, before the attack, the two people who committed the attack were observed in their garage late at night doing things that their neighbors thought were very suspicious. Of course, they were both Arab-looking. And some of the neighbors said they didn't turn them in because they felt maybe they were being prejudiced. So they were being affected by the tyranny of political correctness that is stopping us from reporting things we otherwise would report. Major Nadal in the Army gets promoted to major while he was writing, and it was being reported, jihadist screeds and communicating with terrorists overseas. And we promoted him to major. I'm sorry, I don't think that happens unless there's a kind of political correctness that has been, pushed on people. I know many people that are afraid to say Islamic extremist terrorism. We got to get free to that. We need like a Declaration of Independence from political correctness.
I'm for that.
And I could, if I had the time, tell you terrorist attacks that were stopped because of, in one case, a police officer who did see two Arab gentlemen surveilling a subway suspiciously, and by turning them in, he stopped a bombing of that subway and possibly several others. So this is very, very important. What the leader says is very important. When I was in the Justice Department, you couldn't use the word mafia. And do you know who got that taken out? Mario Biaggi and the Italian Civil Rights League. Mario Biaggi I put in prison. The Italian Civil Rights League was founded by Joseph Colombo, the head of a mafia crime family. And I was an Italian American, and my view was every group has good people and bad people. Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Muslims, Italians, whatever. And all the good people should be on one side, and we should all be against the percentage of bad people, which is roughly the same for all of us, on the other side. And I would like to see that happen in the Islamic world. I'd like to see that happen in a more dramatic way.
Yeah, more pronounced. Mayor, I think I can speak for many, many Americans, and reflecting back 15 years ago to the attack of 9/11, and thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being, the title America's Mayor, because of the leadership and the confidence that you instilled in a time of crisis that let people know we can get through that. And I say that for this, number one, to thank you. But number two, you could easily just enjoy retirement. You don't need to be out here, speaking at events like this and taking the risk of the media saying nice things about you.
I would be so uncomfortable if they did.
I know.
I would feel, I worked for Ronald Reagan, and President Reagan taught me something. He said, I read the New York Times editorials, and then I do the opposite.
Well, having said that, this was my question. Why are you spending your time out on the campaign trail with Donald Trump?
Two reasons. First, for my country. I believe that if this country is turned over to Hillary Clinton, we will end up being a European social democracy. And I believe Israel will be in grave jeopardy. And I believe that Islamic terrorism will continue to keep us on defense. When she said the other night, ruling out putting troops on the ground before she even got her sentence out. That is such a sign of weakness. The thing we hear most often from this president is no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. At least leave the darn thing open as a possibility to frighten your enemy. So I'm doing it for my country and for my children, and I'm doing it because Donald Trump has been my friend for 28 or 29 years. I am absolutely disgusted at the way in which the press is covering him. This is a very good man. This is a very honest man. This is an enormously accomplished man who happens to be a tremendous executive, which is what you need in a president. And it reminds me of what Ronald Reagan went through. And in my view, Ronald Reagan was the greatest president of the second half of the 20th century. And since I know him as a personal friend, I can see those qualities in him. And I want America to see them. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Rudy Giuliani.